In modern warfare, air power is everything, and when the nations of the world send flying machines to face armies on the ground, the results are often devastating. The American A-10 can annihilate all that stands in its way, nearly impervious to the beating it'll certainly take in return. The Soviet-made Su-25 can lay waste to enemy columns as its pilots sit safe and sound behind the stick. The Jaguar, the Ghibli, the Golden Eagle, and more. They all fill the ranks of global air forces, dropping bombs, firing precision strikes, and carving canyons of cannon fire against all who dare stand opposed. They are raw power, rumbling through the skies in a brutal show of force, precisely as their makers intended. But raw power isn't always the answer, and a thundering attack jet, formidable as it may be, isn't always the right tool for the job. Believe it or not, the plane that serves as the global standard of ground attack aircraft in the 21st century isn't even on that list, and in fact, it doesn't even look like it's from this century at all. Meet the A-29 Super Tucano, a propeller-driven, profoundly subsonic, underwhelming little piece of kit with the potential to kick your ass like it's nobody's business. Now, before we tell the story of how the A-29 Super Tucano came to be, we're going to start by explaining something equally important: why it works. It's a bold claim that we just made a second ago, that this humble little propeller plane sets a gold standard that the Warthog, the Frogfoot, the Jaguar, and more all try to match. But as counterintuitive as it may be, the nature of 21st century warfare has made it so. See, all those big scary attack jets were built with one major role in mind: to oppose the military forces of a rival major power. The Americans built the Warthog with the intention of devastating Soviet armored troop columns as they marched across the Iron Curtain into Western Europe in an attack that never came. The Soviets built the Frogfoot with the intent of doing the same thing to the Americans and the Europeans in an attack that never came. And while it's not unheard of in the modern era for rival militaries to clash on the ground in the great tank and artillery battles that these attack jets were meant to disrupt, it's entirely not a common occurrence. The nature of 21st century warfare, at least to this point at around the quarter mark of the 21st century, has borne little resemblance to what the aircraft designers and strategists of the Cold War expected. Instead, it's looked a whole lot more like what America and NATO experienced in Iraq and Afghanistan, what both NATO and Russia experienced in Syria, and what other world nations have experienced in the Colombian rainforests, the scrublands of the Sahel, the mountains of the Caucasus, and a whole lot more. It's bloody, unpredictable, asymmetric warfare where modern air forces aren't going to dogfight with skilled adversary pilots in midair, but instead wage a sustained campaign against insurgencies on the ground. And in a conflict like that, the problem isn't just that these powerful attack aircraft are overkill, it's that they provide a sledgehammer to a problem that is better suited to be dealt with by a screwdriver. Back in the 1990s, the Brazilian Aerospace and Defense Corporation, Embraer, were looking to build an attack aircraft of its own. In those days, the Embraer brass didn't yet understand the problem the world's military powers didn't know they had. But they did know from first-hand experience that not every nation that faced security threats would be able to invest in those sorts of warplanes. Since 1980, Embraer had been manufacturing a plane called the Tucano, a combination trainer and light attack aircraft that was durable, capable of carrying significant ordnance despite its single turboprop design, and capable of flying at long ranges while mounting all sorts of weapon systems. The Tucano was a smash hit with the militaries of the world, particularly those that couldn't afford more advanced attack aircraft, and it would serve in South America with Brazil, Colombia, Venezuela, Peru, and more, in Africa with Egypt, Angola, Kenya, and others, and in the Middle East with Iraq, Iran, and Kuwait. The French and the British even picked up about 200 Tucanos between the two of them, and Britain went a step further, with Northern Ireland's Shaw Brothers Aerospace Company securing a license to produce the Tucano in-house. Very quickly, the Tucano became the go-to aircraft for basic flight training, and many of the nations who purchased them would send very favorable reports on how the Tucano had dealt with local insurgencies and rebel movements. So, with the resounding success of the Tucano, Embraer's engineers and executives back in Sao Paulo understood that they had a real prospect on their hands. But choosing where to take the aircraft next would prove to be a difficult process. At first, Embraer invested in an updated Tucano design that never came to fruition. Then they looked at building a helicopter killer design explicitly built to hunt down the attack helicopters that many smaller regional militaries will face as their biggest threat if they go to war with a similarly small neighbor military. A handful of mismatched prototypes were constructed, but none were ever chosen to extend into production until Embraer's own home government came to the company with a bit of a request. You see, around this time, Brazil had a border issue, and more precisely, it had an issue with the porous nature of the Amazon rainforest. The outer fringes of Brazil's west were so hard to patrol that illegal flights, mostly involved with regional drug trade, could come and go in and out of Brazil with hardly any issues. Brazil had come to Embraer, hoping that they could build a plane suitable for border intercepts and patrol, and the Brazilian Air Force would also quickly chime in, saying that the country could really use a new advanced military trainer to replace an aging model Brazil was relying on. The aircraft Brazil was asking for was already imagined quite concretely before Embraer got its say. Brazil was looking for a plane engineered specifically to deal with the conditions of the Amazon. It should be able to withstand high temperatures, suffocatingly high humidity, and torrential rainfall. It should also be a turboprop plane rather than a jet, and it should be able to operate in challenging environments, relying on short airfields where there would be little to no infrastructure and minimal support for long periods of time. It was intended to operate in both daytime and nighttime conditions, featuring a long range, and it should be hardy, reliable, and well armed enough to operate autonomously for extended periods of time. Finally, while it was meant to be rugged and survivable, it didn't have to be able to, say, land with a wing and engine, half the landing gear and parts of its metal skin ripped off like America's A-10 could. This was to be an aircraft that would never have to withstand a direct shot from a tank or a barrage of dedicated anti-aircraft fire, but was instead meant to operate against adversaries who were equipped with small arms, shoulder-fired weapons, and not a whole lot else. Embraer would receive the equivalent of $50 million to build the aircraft, relying on its Tucano model as a base. Embraer and the Brazilian government had both agreed that the Tucano was a suitable foundation for this new plane. Full-scale design and development would kick off in 1995. Two modified older Tucanos would make their first flights in 1996 and 1997, and a production-ready version of the new plane would take its maiden flight in 1999. Embraer would give its new plane superior engines, a far better airframe, better exterior armor, a wider range of onboard weapons, and advanced cockpits, data links, and avionics, all benefiting a plane prepared for the 21st century. By the time production was set to begin, Embraer's changes were so wide-ranging and extreme that they'd functionally made a new aircraft, and when it came time to pick a name, the answer was obvious. The plane's predecessor was the Tucano, but this new bird was better in just about every way, so it was dubbed the Super Tucano. And starting in the year 2003, it got straight to work. The Embraer A29 Super Tucano, also designated the ALX or the EMB314, is a two-seater aircraft with a pilot seat up front and a rear seat that can alternately be designed for a navigator, in attack and counterinsurgency aircraft, or for a flight instructor in the trainer model. From its nose prop at the front to its rudder at the back, the Super Tucano measures 11.38 meters or 37 feet 4 inches, with a wingspan giving it a nearly square profile at 11.14 meters or 36 feet 7 inches. Sitting empty, the Super Tucano clocks in at 3,200 kilograms or a bit over 7,000 pounds, barely more than a third of the weight of the world's most common fighter jet, the F-16. At takeoff, the plane can fly at weights up to 5,400 kilograms or nearly 12,000 pounds. It's powered by a Pratt & Whitney turboprop engine producing 1,600 horsepower and driving a 5-bladed, fully feathering propeller of a diameter of 2.4 meters or about 8 feet. That propeller is designed to be quiet at high altitudes, allowing the Super Tucano to loiter as a little pinprick in the sky while doing reconnaissance unlikely to catch the attention of an adversary on the ground. Although the Super Tucano's propeller-driven design ensures that it will never cross the sound barrier under its own power, it can manage impressive speeds for an aircraft of its type, hitting a top speed of 590 kilometers an hour or 370 miles per hour. Its cruising speed isn't far off at 520 kilometers per hour or 320 miles per hour, but for reasons that we'll get into later, its stall speed is one of its most impressive features. The plane doesn't stall out until slowing down to speeds of 148 kilometers an hour or just 92 miles per hour, a similar speed to what a driver could achieve on the most permissive global freeways. On patrol or on long-flying training missions, it boasts a range of 1,330 kilometers or 830 miles, giving it over 5 hours in the air before returning to base, while in combat with a heavy weapons load, its range is closer to 550 kilometers or 340 miles. The aircraft can manage over 8 hours of endurance in a single flight and can hit altitudes altitudes comparable with commercial jets at just over 10,000 meters or about 35,000 feet. And in the event that the Super Tucano is fitted out for combat rather than training, it's the sort of aircraft that you absolutely do not want to run into. For the Super Tucano, versatility is the name of the game, and the combinations of kits that it can carry are seriously impressive. In addition to 2 internal machine guns, 1 per wing, the plane can carry up to 5 additional machine gun or cannon pods under the wings and fuselage, depending on the setup and the specific pods in use. On those same 5 pylons, the Super Tucano can mount unguided bombs and rocket pods, including several different rocket options and incendiary and cluster bombs. Alternately, it can carry several air-to-air missiles, including the time-tested Sidewinder or air-to-ground missiles. It's capable of mounting several different sorts of laser and GPS-guided bombs, and if needed, it can carry pods of flares and chaff, special sensor pods, or drop tanks to extend its range. Under the hood, the Super Tucano brings some serious technology to bear, starting with several computerized attack assets, including, but not limited to, systems to aid with so-called toss bombing, where an aircraft pulls up while dropping its bomb and gives that bomb a longer time in flight, and optical reflex sights that superimpose markers around a tracked target in flight, sort of like a bullseye. The aircraft's onboard systems can predict and show the pilot a point of impact for the bombs it drops, and it also provides a full heads-up display. They're also equipped with onboard data hubs and encrypted data links, and they carry onboard GPS systems, helmet-mounted displays for the pilots, onboard video cameras, airborne weather projection systems, Wi-Fi integration for certain smart bombs, electronic trainer systems, and somehow even more beyond that. The plane's onboard systems allow for detailed mission planning while in flight. They boast infrared systems. They can warn the pilot about approaching missiles like a sophisticated fighter jet could, and in perhaps a more analog feature, it can also survive a bird beaming itself onto the glass cockpit at several hundred kilometers per hour. Its sophisticated onboard technology, its highly varied weapons selection, and its payload capacity and range mean that the Super Tucano only explicitly loses out to advanced modern attack jets in a few areas. Its cruising speed is almost directly comparable to the American A-10 or the Russian Su-25. It can mount many of the same weapons, and it does better in austere environments, as we'll discuss in just a moment. But the Super Tucano's proponents will also suggest that in certain situations, the Super Tucano is simply better for the air attack job than any of the jets that would seem, at least outwardly, like more capable aircraft. To understand why, we've got to think about what the close air support role actually demands of an aircraft. On the one hand, the aircraft should be able to mount longer range weapons like air-to-ground missiles that can fire from a few kilometers or a few tens of kilometers out. Both the Super Tucano and the modern jets can do that just fine, but on the other hand, they've also got to be able to get up close and personal with enemy ground forces, and it's there that the Super Tucano excels. For an aircraft in that role, a few critical characteristics matter, and they're almost the opposite of what you'd expect air forces to want from a highly sophisticated warplane. How slow and stable can an attack aircraft fly without falling out of the sky? How maneuverable is it at low altitudes, and how fast can it turn around for multiple attack runs? And when it comes to damage, the question isn't whether it can avoid being hit, its operators know full well it's going to get hit. The question is, how much punishment can it take and still keep flying, and how much work after the fact will it take to make the thing airworthy again? In all of those metrics, the Super Tucano truly excels above its shinier, flashier peers. The plane can fly very low and very slow, strafing ground targets with its gun pods or rockets and dropping bombs with greater precision than it would while flying at higher speeds. It can use its onboard tech to achieve the same level of operator awareness as the pilots of those other aircraft would, and it's much more maneuverable at low speeds, where it can handle the energy losses involved with turns and sudden climbs in that low and slow environment more competently than a jet could. It can turn to take subsequent attack passes significantly faster, and while again it isn't meant to stand up to direct tank or anti-aircraft weapon fire, it's also not meant to. It's built for engagements with insurgencies, rebel groups, drug smugglers, terror organizations, and other asymmetric threats. The same threats that the Warthog, Frogfoot, Jaguar, and more have found themselves facing, but were never really built for. And beyond its advantages over more advanced jet attack aircraft, the Super Tucano offers something that may seem counterintuitive for those living under the auspices of North American, European, East Asian, or the more advanced ex-Soviet militaries, but that happen to be particularly important for just about everybody else. That would be the Super Tucano's autonomy, its capability to operate without dedicated maintenance facilities, tanker refueling, real-time command and control instruction, or even accompanying aircraft to back it up. In its border protection role for Brazil, for example, the Super Tucano works in tandem with a modified regional jet mounted with an onboard early warning sensor that can detect planes coming across the border, but once the jet spots those planes, the Super Tucano is basically on its own to depart from its tiny local airstrip, conduct an interception, and return safely. Said one Embraer strategist about the platform back in the early 2000s, quote, "Above all, the aircraft has to be autonomous. There is no infrastructure out there, and once you are in the middle of the Amazon, you are on your own." But as valuable as the Super Tucano is to have in the Amazon, it's also built to last in a range of other environments. From heavy jungles to open deserts to hilly badlands and more, the Super Tucano can go where more sophisticated jet aircraft simply couldn't. Those more sophisticated aircraft might be a good bit more capable on paper, but they've also got to be babied, in a way, between the long, perfectly level, manicured runways they expect to take off and land from, their many maintenance hours required per flight hour, and a whole lot more. Behind the stick of the Super Tucano, if you can see a strip of relatively flat land, you can probably land on it, and most of the maintenance required to keep it airworthy can be done with a few wrenches, a couple of pairs of hands, and a big box of spare parts dropped off when the plane was sent to a rugged airstrip. And as a trainer aircraft, it's earned rave reviews from trainees and flight instructors alike. Its versatility and high-performance potential makes it an ideal tool to prep pilots for a range of mission roles and to baby new recruits when necessary, or push advanced trainees when they're ready to have some fun. They're able to handle and accommodate errors in flight, easily recoverable from stalls or from unexpected bad maneuvers, and their low-speed potential is unusually forgiving in a plane that can also go much faster as needed. They're easily used for long training missions. They're easily turned around to work with multiple flight instructors across multiple shifts and trainees over the course of a day, and they're just as helpful in training ground controllers to call for and coordinate attack runs. With the versatility, the power, and the true multi-role capabilities of the Super Tucano, it should be no surprise that the aircraft is a favorite of any global military that can afford it. In addition to the 100-odd aircraft in service to Brazil, they're popular in Latin America, operated by Chile, Colombia, Ecuador, and Honduras. The Philippines use them, Nigeria uses them, Indonesia uses them, and so do Lebanon, Mauritania, Burkina Faso, Turkmenistan, Ghana, and a lot of others. The Taliban even has a couple of dozen captured after the fall of Kabul from the previous Afghan government. Nations from Peru to Portugal to Thailand to Ukraine have explored picking up some Super Tucanos, and other nations from Venezuela to Iraq to El Salvador and Sweden have thought long and hard about getting some for themselves before ultimately deciding not to do so for reasons that only rarely had to do with concerns about performance or capability. Even the United States now flies several Super Tucanos under the umbrella of its Special Operations Command, making it the only fully non-US designed aircraft to serve in a direct combat role across the entire US military. And for those of you keeping score at home, yes, we're counting the Harrier. The US played a major role in its design. For the record, although the US didn't help design the Super Tucano, it does now build some of them under license via the Sierra Nevada Corporation. In combat, the Super Tucano has proved its worth again and again, whenever it's had the opportunity. Brazil's Frontier Patrol program, known as SIVAM, has employed the Super Tucano since it went into service and has used the aircraft to conduct several successful air interceptions, but more broadly, its mere presence has led to far fewer attempts at aerial border crossings. It was used in crackdowns on drug trafficking organizations and illegal mining syndicates, bombing airstrips, intercepting dozens of aircraft, and leading to immense seizures of drugs and weapons. In Colombia, the Super Tucano has gotten a far tougher workout over the years, starting in 2007 when a Super Tucano squadron became the first ever of the aircraft to take part in a combat mission. In that mission, and many missions since, the Super Tucano used its sophisticated targeting system to drop bombs with high precision against the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, better known as FARC, and other associated rebel groups. In one attack in 2010, 25 Super Tucanos dropped 7 tons of munitions onto a FARC camp during a massive Special Forces raid, and other attacks would see Super Tucano squadrons lay waste to a wide range of FARC targets as one of, if not the most effective tools in Colombia's entire counterinsurgency arsenal. One Super Tucano would go down in Colombia during the aircraft service, purportedly shot down by a .50 caliber machine gun, though Colombia disputes this claim. In exchange, Super Tucanos would cripple FARC's military and economic potential, driving the collection of insurgent groups toward conditions that would eventually lead to a 2016 peace settlement. Elsewhere around the world, the Super Tucano has proven critical for the Dominican Republic in its efforts to deter Haitian and international drug traffickers from entering Dominican airspace. In Indonesia, they've helped to quell unrest in several restive areas, although a crash between 2 of the aircraft would kill all 4 operators in East Java. In the Sahel nations of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Mauritania, they've played a role role in combating a range of Islamist insurgencies, and in Nigeria, they've been part of the effort to chase down the terror group Boko Haram. In Philippines, they've carried out airstrikes on Islamic State fighters and other terror groups, while in Afghanistan, they were used in efforts to fight back against the Taliban until Taliban victory in 2021. And while the true extent of their combat use has almost certainly been kept partially secret by world nations, their use in a range of countries with ongoing insurgencies and porous borders would suggest that they're probably in frequent use in many rugged environments. As of now, the next step for the Super Tucano is likely to be the A29N, a NATO-ready variant of the aircraft that Embraer is working hard to complete. As usual with the Tucano line, Embraer is looking to create a precise solution to a precise problem, integrating solid tech and fighting capabilities to be sure, but integrating the ones that the situation calls for rather than those that will look best on paper. In this instance, Embraer is looking to be in the right place at the right time for what's expected to be a large-scale rearmament of NATO nations after Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine. The NATO variant Super Tucano is expected to integrate NATO standard data links and a suite of other equipment that treaty member militaries are expected to have. It'll also come equipped with a suite of new training tools, including virtual reality and mixed reality equipment to bring new pilots up to speed. Because of its low endurance and its likely inability to stand up to Russian tanks, it's not going to be the only ground attack aircraft in NATO's arsenal. But when paired with advanced multi-role fighters like the F-35, F-16, Rafale, and Typhoon, plus strategic bomber assets, it becomes a specialized tool that can be used to great effect in the right moments. NATO will be receiving a proven aircraft. As of now, the global Super Tucano fleet has logged well over 500,000 flight hours across just 260 aircraft, including more than 60,000 combat hours, with just one Super Tucano being shot down during a combat mission. It's done all of that while fitting budget constraints of less well-off nations, serving as a trainer, an armed reconnaissance platform, a border patrol aircraft, and an attack plane all at once. In a world where fifth-generation fighters, near-invisible bombers, and sophisticated autonomous drones get all the headlines, it's the Super Tucano that was made to do the dirty work. And as the world is quickly realizing, the Super Tucano does that dirty work better than just about anything else.